Hey guys, Lucas from iExplore here. Today we're going to do some photography in Shiodome, which is this really cool architectural area here in Tokyo. We've shot here before and we regularly do workshops here as well. But anyway, in this video I want to talk about my top 5 heuristics for photography, specifically street photography, but I think photography in general. But before that, I want to say thank you to all of you who support us on Patreon. We really appreciate it, even though we're not posting as much these days. But also, if you want to support the channel in other ways, if you are in Tokyo, please take a workshop with us, either with me or one of the other talented guys on our team. Or we also have a map of Tokyo photo spots that is available on our website for purchase, and that also helps us out big time, and of course helps you out to plan your next adventure in Tokyo. And one last thing, I do have a book out called Tokyo Unseen. It is available online for purchase, link in the description below, so please check that out. All right, let's get on to the video.
iExplore.
So we're going to talk about these 5 heuristics, but first let me just explain a little bit what a heuristic is, in my mind at least. I mean, of course, there's a dictionary definition, but my understanding of this word, and I'm just using the fancy word just for fun, by the way, is just, it's like an algorithm that you use when you encounter a certain trigger or situation, right? So for example, like tools are a great example of heuristics in a sense. Like if you see a nail, like if you have a nail and you want to do something with that nail, you're going to use a hammer, right? The hammer is the heuristic. If you have a screw, you'd be kind of weird if you used the hammer. You could probably get away with it, but you'd be better off using a screwdriver, right? That's kind of what heuristics are. They're like a tool that you use in a particular situation. So in photography, there are these heuristics. I think we all employ them all the time, even when we don't think about it. And I think the most important and the most fundamental, so number 1 on this list, is this basic idea of less is more, right? If you have fewer things in the frame, generally, that's going to be better. It's going to make your photo easier to understand and simpler. But then, that's not exactly a heuristic just yet, right? That's just a concept. The heuristic requires some sort of step. Like I said, it's like an algorithm. It's like a step-by-step sort of process, right? So the way I kind of employ less is more in terms of this heuristic idea is that I look around the edge of my frame. So if I want to frame a particular subject, and in this case I'm going to shoot this walkway behind me, like it's very cool, I like the architecture, I like the building, the light, okay, it's great. But then when I'm actually framing, I'm not looking so much at the center of my frame, at the subject itself. I'm looking around the edges, all 4 of them, and I'm making this decision. Do I want this thing that's on the edge, some object or whatever, in or out? Now, of course, once you get really good at this and you internalize it, you don't need to pick the camera up to start to make that decision. You can already decide what's in or out before you even pick the camera up. But as you're looking through it, you should still be making that decision. So let me take a picture here. This is a very basic scene, but I'm going to get a little lower as well. And I can shoot it like this. And it's cool, but immediately, I see this sign for the coffee shop here, right? And that's where this less is more heuristic should kick in, right? I immediately think, okay, I'm going to get rid of this. Now, this is a very obvious example for the sake of illustration, but there are more subtle things you will encounter when you're doing photography. So I'm going to move forward because I don't have a zoom lens on my little GR here, all right? And then I'm going to take another shot, and there we go. That's much cleaner without the sign. Now, it might even be possible that I get just like a bit of the sign, right? If I'm around here. I have like just kind of the edge of it and like half the name of the shop. And that's not good either, right? So that's where the looking around the edge really, really helps, right? So in this case, I might even scooch just a little more forward so I can be in the center. And then I'm gonna just focus down there. And then it is, as I said, a pretty, basic shot of a cool scene. And then I'm gonna do a vertical one as well because I like this big shadow here on the ground. All right, so that's concept number 1, or heuristic number 1. Less is more. Look around the edges of your frame and try to eliminate the things that are distracting. All right, so for the second heuristic, we're going to talk about the edges again. We talked about removing things, on the edges and looking around the edges. But what we can also use the edges for in a photo is to align objects to the edge. And I find that to be very useful when I'm shooting, especially like architecture, which is why I came to this area, but even other things, if something is aligned in some way to the edge, which means I'm not necessarily always holding my camera level. Sometimes I'm going to rotate my camera to employ this technique. And I find it helps me ground photos or make photos interesting or kind of plant it into the frame, even when I'm, kind of messing with the angles and stuff because I'm shooting up at buildings or something like that, for example. But again, it can work in street photography as well. So let me show you an example here. We have these 2 skyscrapers here. We have this one in the foreground and that actually taller one, but in the background, which looks smaller. And so if I just point my camera up at them, right? And the natural tendency is just to hold the camera level. So here I'm gonna hold it nice and level. I really want like only these 2 skyscrapers. So I took one sort of straight ahead first, but now I'm gonna, angle it. Like I'm shooting up there, so I have the big skyscraper on the left and the other skyscraper on the right. And that looks fine, but they're both kind of converging, right? So what I might do is do that again, but this time I'm going to rotate the camera so that the one on the right side is flush with the right side of the frame. And then likewise I could do the other direction, which I think doesn't, in this case, doesn't look as good, but I'm just going to demonstrate it anyway. Okay? And so now I have a frame where that skyscraper on the right is perfectly, you know, straight up and down, like it's vertical, but I have the other skyscraper like leaning over and basically like falling on top of it in a sense. Now, this isn't necessarily the way you want to shoot. I'm not saying this is, you have to do it this way. It's just a heuristic that I employ. I have this in my tool belt, as I made the tool analogy in the beginning. This is the hammer that I use for this situation, right? And I find it very useful, and I think it's you know, allowed me to produce a lot of fun and kind of surprising images, because it's a very simple image, but compared to the one where everything is level, it's much more abstract and kind of surprising, right? So essentially, to summarize the heuristic, try to align objects in your frame to one of the edges of the frame and just see if that works for you. That can be very useful in certain situations. All right, guys, so the third heuristic that I think is kind of fundamental, at least for me, and I use all the time for all kinds of photography, is the idea of dynamic leading lines, especially when they come out of the corners, right? So we think of leading lines as this sort of cliche thing where it's like the train tracks converging, like you've seen that example. But to me, it's much deeper than that. Like, leading lines are always a thing that you encounter in pretty much every image. There's always some lines in the image that are leading the eye around. The question is just, are they leading the eye anywhere through the frame, or is the eye just getting kind of lost in the geometry, right? So I think even a better way to put this, I think leading lines is, I say because, you know, everybody kind of understands that and has heard of that before, but I actually think leading geometry is a more general way to put this, because the lines also don't necessarily have to be straight, but the example I'm going to use right now employs straight lines. So behind me here we have this escalator, right? And it has so many different diagonal lines, and I could shoot it a bunch of different ways. I could just shoot it kind of like totally normally straight, right? But what I'm going to do here is I'm going to angle my camera so that the diagonal lines all converge into the top left corner of the frame. All right, here we go. So there we go. So I'm angling the frame in such a way that all these diagonal lines kind of converge into the top left corner of the frame, or not every single one of them because there's so many lines, but as many as I could get. But in the same time, I'm also getting another line that's coming out of the bottom right corner of the frame and also meeting those other lines in the top left corner of the frame. So essentially I'm trying to create leading lines, right? Leading geometry that allow the viewer to kind of naturally flow with their eye, look through the frame in various ways. Now again, I waited specifically just for there to be nobody there right now because I wanted to illustrate the geometry very cleanly. But like, if there is a person, and there is one right now going up, then they become part of that composition, right? And then it kind of, all these that's why I call them dynamic leading lines, because these dynamic leading lines give a sense of motion. And so this person is riding up the escalator, and I feel like the lines converging in the upwards direction add to that a little bit, right? So again, this is maybe a very kind of simple example. They could be more abstract or more subtle, these lines. They happen even in photos of like just typical street scenes that you imagine. The lines can also be virtual lines, like somebody pointing somewhere or somebody looking somewhere. That also creates a leading line or a leading geometry. But these things should be, you know, employed in a way that is dynamic or static if you want that to make things look not like they're moving, but typically I use them in a dynamic way, meaning from the corners, that's where you have the most potential for a long leading line, because corner to corner is the longest part of the frame. All right, hope that made sense. Let's move on to the next heuristic. All right, so the fourth heuristic that I want to share with you guys today is the utilization of reflections to create symmetry. Now that's a pretty, you know, straightforward one, right? It's not maybe as fundamental as those other ones. Those other ones were about, like the first three were more about geometry and lines and kind of simplicity in the frame. Reflections are something kind of more specific, but it is a heuristic that I employ. It is, again, a tool that when I see a piece of glass, this is like the nail, then the hammer is use the reflection. But now, specifically, how do I use the reflection? So I'm referring to a particular type of reflection, because of course, if there's like a puddle on the ground and I shoot it from up here, I'm gonna get a reflection. And that's cool too, but that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about specifically these perfectly symmetrical reflections that you achieve by putting your camera right along the surface. So there's a little surface here, there's a nice piece of glass, right? And I'm gonna put my camera right on the glass like this, Okay, I'm gonna focus up there, and that's the shot. And it's easy peasy, honestly. It's actually so easy it feels kind of cheap. Now, those of you who've taken the Tokyo Metropolis photography workshop will have probably taken this photo with me or with Charles or any of the other guys on the team, because we like this spot and it's a great example of this technique, right? But in general, anytime there's these reflective surfaces like glass or whatever around the city, I always think to myself, can I try to get a reflection? And sometimes it doesn't work, sometimes it's not interesting, but the point is reflective surfaces, along them, you can get a cool effect. So that's the fourth heuristic. But I want to give you guys one more example of this just to kind of change it up, because this is like a very perfectly clean one. There's this pillar over here where you can also get a reflection, but it'll be different because it's much more distorted, right? Because first of all, the pillar is curved, and secondly, it's like this kind of textured metal. And actually, to be honest, I want to be more over here, but they put these cones up because there's some danger up there or something, that something's going to fall. But coincidentally, I can also employ here two of the other heuristics, and probably all three actually, that we've already explained, which is why I wanted to show this shot. Because first of all, I have the reflection, which was the heuristic we just talked about. Second of all, I have diagonal dynamic leading lines leading into the corner, which was the third, I don't remember, one of the other heuristics we talked about. And then also I've made the left edge, of this canopy thing perfectly flush with the left edge of my frame, which is another heuristic we've talked about. And of course, less is more. I've tried to eliminate, there was like a bit of some other building kind of jutting into the frame, so I've kind of eliminated it. In fact, let me take an example with that other building, right? So it's there, but then I'm going to eliminate it. It's actually very tough to eliminate it because it's a tight fit, but one more example. So it's there, and then if I reframe just ever so slightly, it's not there. So that's the idea, right? There and not there. So this scene already combines all four of these heuristics, but we have one more that we're going to talk about. All right, guys, so the fifth heuristic is this concept of shooting through things. Now, this is not as fundamental as those earlier ones, which are all about like kind of the lines and geometry. This is just something that I encounter in the city all the time. And of course, I've over the years seen other photographers do it, especially the master photographers like Saul Leiter and others as well, where you're shooting through a piece of glass or through some element, and there's reflections and layers and all that kind of stuff, and you get this cool scene. So that's what I want to demonstrate now. There's this kind of a cool spot over here. In general, this spot, actually, this is a great subject there right now. Can I get him? This is a cool subject on its own. There's this big like atrium behind me, and you can shoot down there. And again, we've used this in previous videos as an example of things. In general, I like using this Shiodome area because it's like a playground for photographers where you can demonstrate a lot of different things in a very small area. So that's why we're here. But I've never demonstrated this shot. So usually we would shoot into the atrium. Again, we use this on the workshop too. But I'm going to stay outside of this piece of glass because you can see that the floor is like reflecting into this open space in the atrium. So I'm gonna go past this nasty like tinfoil on the ground. I don't like that. But maybe from around here somewhere, I can shoot, with a bit of the floor. Yeah, the light is such today that the floor is not reflecting that strongly, but it's kind of there. But also I have these railings over here. So the railing will, be like a nice element in the foreground. Then I have to watch out for my shoes to not be in the frame. But let's see, there's some people coming through. Okay, not bad. It's like a couple of people, so it would have been better with just one. There's also like this texture here. Maybe I can use this a little bit if I get very close, but that's a little bit too fine of a texture. So, so I'm just looking for, again, this tinfoil kind of messes it up. I'd rather be over there, but not with the tinfoil. But in any case, I'm just looking for like these kind of opportunities where these objects in the foreground create some other, bit of interest, some layering that take my just normal photo. If I just did it like this, that's pretty cool, but it adds something to it when I shoot through things. Okay, and even here, look, there's people on the escalator, but then I could shoot them like this. There we go, and I just have these extra layers, which add some interest. So, is it always the right move? Not necessarily. It might be, It might be kind of the wrong thing in some situations. Maybe this scene would be better to shoot if I just did it. Actually it does look pretty cool, that escalator just on its own without anything. So just to show you guys the difference, right? And I'm not really waiting for any interesting people, but there it is. So it's a choice. But again, going back to this tool analogy of heuristics, if I see a nail, I use a hammer. If I see these kind of elements in the foreground, I might use this technique of shooting through them, okay? And there are many other ways to shoot through things. This is just one example. But that is another heuristic that I like to use all the time, so maybe it works for you guys as well. All right, guys, so if you stuck around this long, we got a bonus for you. This is like a 6th heuristic. I mean, I don't know if it's exactly a heuristic, but it's just something that I keep in mind when it comes to composition, because we've talked about all these concepts of how to use the environment and whatever, but we didn't really talk about like what are we trying to convey through in terms of meaning through these things. So in this example, or this heuristic, I want to talk about kind of narrative composition, as I call it, meaning using these different things to tell a kind of a story, right? So I'm going to combine a few of the things we've talked about. I'm going to use the, like lining up the frame or something to the edge of the frame. Less is more, of course, that's always in play, and leading lines, diagonal lines, that kind of thing, and maybe even I'm throwing a reflection in order to create this scene that emphasizes the vastness of the city and the smallness of people in the city. So let's come over here. I'm going to try this shot. But we have this really cool staircase, and there's people up there. There's already a guy up there. Look at that. Oh my God. Okay. Wow. Timing. We'll probably wait for another person. But yeah, that actually turned out pretty good. Let's do another one here. Okay, so missed that opportunity, didn't get the best one. But the key thing is that what I want is a little person at the top of those stairs, but then I don't want anything to the left. So I'm gonna do like a bad example now. So I'm gonna include this building on the left, and then I'm gonna not include it. And now you may disagree. This is subjective. So you may say, well, Lucas, I actually prefer it with the building. That is totally fine. This is just my perspective on these things. But I want to remove that building. I want to remove as much as possible to just have that little tiny human figure, and then have the buildings on the other side towering over him, right? Or her, whatever, over the person. And then also I angled the frame so that the person is more or less straight on the left side, kind of, right? I mean, I'm basically trying to align the left side more. And that means the buildings on the right side are completely like toppling over, kind of like we did in a building in the second, I believe, heuristic, right? So that's what I'm doing. Okay, I'm trying to find this kind of framing. And I could adjust the details. I'm also trying to, in the same time, put some diagonal leading lines into the corners if I can manage that. And then lastly, there's a reflective surface here, so I don't think the light's right for it today because the sun is like blasting onto this, but there is potential here for a reflection, so I might do that. Yeah, basically though, I'm just saying all that to stall for time to hope that another person comes because I messed it up when that other guy was there. It was just bad luck. But I'm sure I'll show some examples of this scene that I have taken in the past. This is a scene I've shot 1,000,000 times because it's just so good. So, not a big deal. But okay, we might get a potential here a little bit. Right, and see, to me, when they're down here on the stairs, it doesn't quite work. Maybe with the reflection, I don't know. I'm gonna wait till he's a little silhouette at the very top. Come on, a little bit more. I'll already take one, but I need him at the top. Great, beautiful. And you see, in this case, I did get it so that he is upright. I leveled it. Oh, another guy, but he's got a shopping bag. It's not as interesting. So I got him perfectly upright. That's the key thing. You see, the man is vertically upright in the frame, and then the buildings are kind of tottering over him. And so this is what I mean about narrative composition. To me, this kind of scene, it emphasizes this vastness of the city with the tiny human figures. I like shooting these kind of things. I find them very fascinating. But I'm also using all these concepts that we just talked about to kind of put it all together and help convey that narrative, right? To make the city feel bigger by making it angle over him, et cetera, et cetera. So, yeah, that's kind of the 6th heuristic. It's not exactly heuristic per se, it's just how do you put it all together to actually convey some meaning rather than just arranging lines and geometries, because that's not necessarily what photography is about, right? Okay, so I hope you guys found those 5 or 6 heuristics useful. Okay, tell me in the comments what heuristics you guys use. I would love to hear from you guys, or what you think about these, or have you used these? Or if you've taken a workshop and you've done some of these photos with us, let me know. I always like to hear from people who've taken a workshop with us in the past. All right, so thank you guys so much for watching. I'll catch you guys in the next video, and remember, always challenge your eye.